make sure you know what it is that you're very passionate about. Are you passionate about coding? Are you passionate about selling? Are you passionate about basketball? Find what you're passionate about, and then find what things you're pretty good at, where your natural talents lie, and then find where those two things intersect and look to do some type of work in that intersection. So you combine what you love with what you're pretty good at, and that's usually a pretty good starting point.
Hi, and welcome everybody to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Nayan at Leaders Hum. Just a quick introduction of peopleHum. It is an end-to-end, one-view, integrated human capital management automation platform. The winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that is specifically built and crafted for employee experiences and the future of work with AI and automation technologies. We run the peopleHum blog and a video channel specifically targeting leaders and young leaders through our Leaders Hum series. And it is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome Alan Stein to our program today. Alan is a speaker, a coach, and an author with expertise in improving organizational performance, cohesion, and accountability. He has spent over 15 years working with the highest performing professional basketball players on the planet, the likes of, two-time NBA Finals MVP Kevin Durant, just to mention one name. And he now teaches companies on how to utilize the same strategies in business that elite athletes use to perform at world-class levels. It's a great pleasure, Alan, having you on the program today.
Well, I'm equally excited. We'll have a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
Yep. So maybe, Alan, just for our audience, right, might make sense if you just give us a quick background about yourself and how you ended up where you are today.
Sure. I'm going to take you way back to when I was 5 years old, is when basketball became my first identifiable passion. And I fell in love with the game. And here 40 years later, basketball is still a major pillar in my life. And the reason I share that is basketball has been the red thread that's connected everything I've ever done. And I was an okay high school player, was able to play at the college level here in the States, and then became a basketball performance coach to help players improve their athleticism. And I did that for 20 years before making a very distinct pivot 5 years ago to take everything that I'd learned from the game and show folks how to apply that to their businesses and how to utilize those same mindsets and disciplines and rituals that elite athletes use, and show people how they can apply that to their organizations and their teams.
I see. Phenomenal. Great. Yeah. And obviously, a lot you always hear about, kind of the parallels. And just for our audience, maybe if you could draw some parallels, that would be useful.
Oh, for sure. It's funny. It would actually be a shorter conversation to discuss the ways sports and business are different than the way they are the same, because I've found that almost everything transfers. There's so much utility between what athletes and sports teams do to become elite and to become champions as to what businesses need to do. Whether we're talking about communication or accountability or work ethic or attitude, the ability to stay in the present moment, the ability to make those around you better. All of those traits have very high transfer. And, to me, that's what makes this work so fun and so exciting, is being able to connect my previous life of being in the gym with athletes all of the time and now showing folks how to apply that to their business.
Right. And I'm sure, through last year, 2020, given the pandemic and, almost like a crisis-like situation, how did you see businesses kind of react or, try to utilize kind of crisis management from a, sports learnings to the corporate world?
Well, I'm so glad you went in that direction, because that's actually one of the best things that someone can learn from sport, is how to deal with adversity and how to deal with challenge. how to deal with losing, if you will. And obviously, I want to be incredibly sympathetic that losing a basketball game is nothing like losing a loved one or losing a job or losing your business. I'm not making that parallel, but the overarching concept of how do you deal with things when they get tough? How do you deal with challenge and adversity? What are the mindsets that you need to have? So I've noticed in particular that a lot of folks in the business landscape that have had sports backgrounds, either they played as a child or they coached, what have you, tend to adapt to adversity better than most people do. And, I think we've seen that, with many of the businesses today. Now, I also recognize that the pandemic can have a much bigger effect on certain industries. The hospitality industry, flights and hotels and restaurants. I mean, they've been hit particularly hard. And there's not always a lot that they could do in their respective situations. But most industries, those that were able to adapt to the change first, and those that were able to sustain that adaptability and effectively make pivots, were the ones that were able to either survive or in many cases thrive. And that's ultimately what sports are all about. You find that you don't play a very good first quarter, you're down a significant number of points. Well, what are you going to do to dig out of that hole? What are you going to do to get some momentum and to change the course of action? And that's really what folks have had to do in the business world during this pandemic.
Right. Yeah, very, very true. In fact, while you were speaking, I was just trying to think, and especially I think this might be true for maybe the international audience, right? Because I oftentimes feel that in the US, you have the back-to-back, there's either the NBA or the NFL or the NHL, and you end up, going to your office on Monday and always pretty much discussing, about team sports, right? While others across the globe do not get that advantage. Would you say that's a huge advantage that the US has that we've never kind of thought about?
Yeah, it may be, especially if you're a diehard sports fan. But, one of the things that I certainly love, and I know it varies from country to country and region to region, but I mean, in Europe, for example, I mean, what we call soccer, everybody else calls football, I mean, that is almost like a religion in many areas. So, the diehard soccer fans in Europe, probably, are much more diehard fans than any fan here of a local NBA team or an NFL team. So I do think sports is something that kind of unites the entire world. And while we may root for different sports and for different teams, I do think sports are just as impactful and just as influential in almost every other country. And again, we're so insulated here in the States that certain sports like cricket don't get a lot of notoriety here. But when you travel overseas, you see that, boy, that is a big time pastime in other areas. So I still love the fact that sports is a uniter. Sports is something that can add motivation and inspiration. And sports is definitely something we can all draw from to improve our own lives and to improve our businesses.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Would definitely agree with you. So I know. I think I read somewhere that one of the questions that you ask often, or have written about, or speak about, is are the habits that you have today on par with the dreams that you may have for tomorrow? And what in your what advice would you give in terms of like some approaches to use habits for long-term success?
Well, ultimately, we are our habits. Wherever we are in life, whoever is watching or listening to this, wherever you are at this very moment, is a culmination of your habits and the decisions that you make consistently. And yes, there are some acute things that can happen here or there that can change our trajectory. But generally speaking, you are a product of your habits. If someone listening to this is very physically fit, they're not physically fit by accident. They're physically fit because they've created habits where they most likely eat healthy foods, work out regularly, and get plenty of sleep. So it's not an accident. People that are very successful financially, that have taken the steps and had the habits to save the money and invest money, they're not financially secure by accident. They're financially secure because they've created those habits. And this mindset really started back in my basketball performance training days, when I'd be working with a middle school or high school age player, and they would say, I have the goal of playing college basketball, or I have the goal of being an NBA player. And I would always say, that's wonderful. That's a lovely goal. But the most important thing is, are you developing college basketball level habits right now? Are you developing an NBA level work ethic and attitude and mindset right now? Because the only chance you have to play college basketball or to play in the NBA is to develop those habits now and then stick with them consistently. And then we'll see where the cards fall. So I share that with everyone now, not just athletes, that when you get a crystallized vision of who you want to become or what you want to achieve, you need to make sure that your habits are in alignment with that.
Nice.
You know, if you want to be in the elite, the upper 1% of your craft, then you need to do things that 99% of people choose not to do. You need to make sure that you have those sound habits. And what I say kind of in jest is, you know, if your habits and your goals are not in alignment, then you need to change one of them. You either need to improve your habits so they match your goals, or you need to lower your goals. And I always say that with a smile, because no one wants to lower their goals. No one wants to aim for mediocrity. Everyone wants greatness. But you just have to make sure that your habits and your mindset and your work ethic are in alignment with that.
I see. Got you. And any tips for people in terms of trying to, you know, identify the type of habits and then obviously sticking to them and being disciplined enough to follow? Just some.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the word discipline, because I think that's one of the most important components. You know, we live in a world that talks a lot about motivation, and it's not that there's anything wrong with motivation, but I actually think motivation can be a little bit overrated, because motivation, even for the highly motivated, is still fleeting. You know, it changes day by day. There are certain days all of us feel more motivated than other days. And if you only work hard and you only do what you're supposed to do on the days that you feel motivated, you won't be very consistent. And consistency is so important. So discipline is what makes sure you'll do what you're supposed to do, even if you don't feel like it in the moment. When you've created that discipline muscle, you know, that example, if I'll use physical fitness again, you know, I'm a pretty physically fit 45-year-old, but if I only worked out on the days that I felt motivated, I'd probably only work out 20 times a year. But instead, because I've created some discipline in my life and I choose to be disciplined, I probably work out 20 times a month. And that's how I'm able to sustain a high level of fitness. So discipline is incredibly important. Another thing that's important is self-awareness. You know, we need to know what things we do well, but we also need to know where our opportunities for growth are. We need to know our hopes and our dreams, but we also have to be realistic about, you know, our fears and our insecurities. And we need to be able to know kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of what makes us who we are, so that we can then apply that discipline to create the habits that we need in order to create that momentum. And the last thing I'll say on this, I think if I had to pick something that undermines our discipline and undermines our progress and results, is lack of self-accountability. Many people default to making excuses, blaming someone or something, or just complaining about the circumstances. And those are three things that will always undermine your performance. Blaming, complaining, and making excuses will never help you improve. So one of the habits that most people need to improve is by eliminating those things, taking full responsibility for everything that happens in your life. And with that being said, I'm very well aware that many of the things that happen in the world are far beyond our control. You know, you and I have no control over this global pandemic, but we each control how we respond to the global pandemic. We each control how we respond to the pivots we have to make in our business or the changes we have to make. And the question becomes, are we going to respond in a way that moves us forward and gives us some positive trajectory? Or are we going to blame, complain, and make excuses and go in the other direction?
Great. So just continuing on, you know, some of the things that you just mentioned as kind of interested in your thoughts. So, one of the things that you said was obviously self-awareness and kind of figuring out, where you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are. Obviously, in a team, you would go to the coach probably, right, in sports. Now, the question, is for the individual in an organization. Again, they could take the excuse which you were mentioning of saying, well, my boss really doesn't care about, my career, my future, or some such. So what advice would you give people in the corporate world in terms of, trying to seek out, somebody who you can go talk to about some of these aspects?
Oh boy, I'm glad you went in this direction as well. That's an incredibly insightful question. And, a few things, as soon as you accept extreme ownership and accountability of yourself, it'll take most of these other little issues away. So if someone listening to this is thinking to themselves, well, my boss isn't doing this or my boss isn't doing that, what you've already done is deflected responsibility off of yourself, and you've now put it on your boss. You've basically given away your control. At the very foundation, you choose whether or not you're going to continue to work there, and you choose whether or not you're going to continue to let that person be your boss. So you have to take ownership of that. And I'm not implying that, that everyone should go quit their job if their boss is difficult. No, I just want folks to say, hey, it is my choice to work for this organization. And part of that choice is working for this boss. So now it's up to me to decide how I'm going to move forward, how I'm going to communicate, how I'm going to progress, and be able to manage and massage around that. But outside of that, any individual listening to this, I hope that on some level, you have an inner circle of people. This could be a spouse, it could be an adult child, it could be a neighbor, a colleague, a friend, a sibling, a family member, but you should have a circle of people that you trust and that care about you, that they want to see you happy, they want to see you fulfilled, they want to see you successful, they don't have any hidden agenda. And you should ask those people, your trusted inner circle, for their evaluation of your situation and of your strengths and weaknesses. And then the key to self-awareness is making sure that the way you evaluate yourself is the way those people view you. And here's the best example I can give you. Clearly, you're a very good listener. That's why we're having a great conversation. But for the sake of this, if I asked you if you were a good listener and you said, yes, I'm a great listener, but then I asked the 4 or 5 people that know you the best, and they said, oh no, he's an awful listener, that would mean you have very low self-awareness. You think you're really good at something, but the rest of the world disagrees. It sounds kind of funny, but if I asked you if you were a good listener, and you said, you know what, Alan, that's actually a skill set I need to improve. Listening is a real opportunity for growth for me. It's something I need to get better at. And then I asked your inner circle and they all said, yeah, he really needs to be a better listener. That would actually mean you have very high self-awareness because you're aware of the fact that listening is not one of your strongest skill sets. And that's actually a great thing because now that you're aware of it, you can make steps and take steps to improve that skill. We'll never improve something we're unaware of. So getting that awareness is key. So if you're finding that your boss is incredibly difficult, I would suggest instead of focusing on that, focus on the part that you have control over, your own effort, your own attitude, your preparation, and make sure that the skill sets that you need to improve are in alignment with the way the rest of the world sees you. And then it's an incredibly liberating feeling when you take power back. So instead of saying my boss is holding me down and my boss is preventing me from being successful, say, no, my boss has nothing to do with it. They might make it a little more difficult. They might make it a little more challenging, but I'm 100% in the driver's seat and I have the keys to the car and I'm going to choose what I need to do to improve and to succeed. And if you get to a point where you feel like your success is being limited by who you work for or where you work, then you have the freedom to move to another organization or to go into business for yourself. So we always have a choice.
Right. Great. Another question, and probably this is coming from, and I come from a technology world. And one of the issues that is quite visible is the fact that typically companies end up taking people who are, probably their best programmers or coders, and kind of, elevating them into a leadership role, right? And obviously, this person has throughout their life spent, writing software, and ends up finding himself or herself in a leadership role, where there's probably very little, if at all, kind of training, mentoring, guidance, and so on. So would love to hear from you, for people who are put into this position, and probably trying to use analogies from the sporting world, if you could draw some, and help these new leaders in terms of how they could, overcome some of these, challenges ahead of for them.
What you bring up is probably one of the biggest issues in organizations today. And if we will use the sports analogy, and I know this has been used before, this is not something I've come up with, but, goal number one is to get the right people on your bus, or get the right people in your locker room. So you want to make sure that, you're pulling in people that are a great fit for your culture, people that have the types of traits and mindsets and habits that are in alignment with your vision and your mission and your core values, people that have the desire and the skill sets necessary for your organization to thrive. So first we have to get everybody, the right people on the bus. But then what is just as important is making sure everybody's in the right seat, and making sure that everybody is playing the role that will allow them to be that will allow them to make the biggest contribution to the group as a whole. So we need to make sure that we don't only have the right people, but we put them in the right places to be successful. Right before we hit record, you and I were talking about the Super Bowl and with American football, and we were talking about Tom Brady, who's without question the best quarterback of all time, possibly the greatest football player of all time. Well, if Tom Brady, if the coach had Tom Brady playing wide receiver or playing running back, he most likely would not be very good. And if someone said, well, man, he's an awful wide receiver, we need to cut him and get him off the team, you would have just eliminated arguably the best quarterback to ever play the game. So in that case, that would be an issue of having him in the wrong position. It's not that he's not valuable, and it's not that he's not good and that he can't make a contribution. You have him playing the wrong position. And I see that with organizations all the time. And you said it so perfectly. We make an assumption that if somebody is an extraordinary coder or software developer, that we want to reward them and we want to promote them. And the next promotion is to make them a manager or a director or a supervisor. And that might not be in alignment with their skill sets. I'm not saying that it's not. I'm sure that there are some coders who would make excellent managers. But if you look at the skill sets, if coding, and I'm going to make some very broad generalizations, if coding is very introverted and very, it's self-reliant, it's me working on this, that might not be the exact same skill sets that one would want to lead others and to be in a leadership position. So those are things we have to ask. I see it happen all of the time with folks in sales. Someone is an extraordinary sales professional. Whether they're selling a service or a product, they sell at a very high clip and they break numbers and they hit their quota. And then someone says, all right, well, we're going to promote you to being the sales manager or the sales director. And now they don't even get a chance to sell. Instead of doing what they do so well, now they're being asked to do something else, which is lead and manage people. And sometimes that's a good fit. Other times it's not. So what I would say is, if I had a group of all-star coders, first of all, I would praise their great work and acknowledge the great work they're doing. I would find ways to reward them and incentivize them in their current roles. But I would ask them and say, do you aspire to being a leader in this organization? If I were to promote you to being a manager or a director, is that something you would relish and want to do? We need to do more asking than telling. And if every single one of them said, no, thank you, I want to stick to coding because this is what I'm great at, then I would need to go find someone else. I would need to do a job search or look in another department and bring in someone that can manage or lead these all-star coders. But I think it'd be worth asking. And if one of them says, yes, I do have an interest in that, then my next step would be, okay, how can I best support you? what type of training or mentorship can I provide for you so that you can learn how to be just as effective of a leader as you've been as a coder or a software developer? So we need to make sure that we're putting the right people in the right positions because you don't want to lose a good person. And if you're an extraordinary coder and I promote you to a manager and now you hate your job and you decide to quit and leave and go somewhere else, well, I just lost an amazing coder because I chose to put you in a position that would not allow you to be successful.
Right. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Another quick question, actually, this is kind of just crossed my mind and more interested in you. I know obviously you do a lot where you take the learnings from sport and apply them to the corporate world. I was curious, have you ever come across or talked to a sports team about what they could learn from the corporate world?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. These principles go back and forth. It's fascinating because most of the time it's folks in business world that hire people, coaches or people from the military to come in and talk to their businesses because they see that there's a direct connection. It's much rarer for a basketball coach to bring in a local CEO to talk to their team, but they absolutely should. Because those principles, again, they have such high utility, they go in both directions. And you better believe that if I was coaching a basketball team, I would bring in other coaches. I would bring in folks from the military, but I would absolutely find some of the best business minds and business leaders to come talk about those same principles. Because when we talk about leadership, communication, culture, cohesion, those things, they know no boundaries. And that would be something that would be very, very valuable.
Right. Great. Okay. Last question, Alan. What advice would you be giving, people who are kind of graduating and going into the corporate world, especially in these times as we are still, although the vaccine's out, we're still in the midst of a, huge pandemic, the likes of which none of us have ever witnessed or experienced. So words of advice for the graduating, seniors as they embark on their careers.
Most certainly. Couple of things. One, make sure you know what it is that you're very passionate about. Are you passionate about coding? Are you passionate about selling? Are you passionate about basketball? Find what you're passionate about. And then find what things you're pretty good at, where your natural talents lie. And then find where those two things intersect and look to do some type of work in that intersection. So you combine what you love with what you're pretty good at. And that's usually a pretty good starting point. Once you've determined that, then your number one goal should be to add as much value as possible to that business or that organization or that team. Don't be worried about what you're going to get from it. Be focused on what you can give to that organization. Make yourself incredibly valuable. So don't be focused on, what's my starting salary? How many vacation days do I get? What office am I going to have? Those things will naturally unfold. And I'm not saying that they're not important, but if you walk into an organization and say, I love your mission and your core values, this is something that I'm confident that my skill sets can add value to. If you put me in the right position, I will do everything in my power to help you all continue to be successful. And you make the focus on serving instead of receiving. And especially as a young person, you'll become invaluable and you'll build an incredibly strong reputation and you'll build really strong skill sets in the process of doing that. And the last thing I'll say is just know that, as a young person entering the workforce, that none of this is permanent. That most of you will most likely change jobs, change industries, and change careers several times over for the next 20 to 30 years. So whatever initial job you take, don't think of it as being permanent. Think of it as, how can I add as much value as possible and learn as much as I can, gain as much experience and expertise as I can. And then when you're ready to make a move to something else, if you find that you're not enjoying this as much as you would like, then you've still grown and you've still been able to matriculate up, and then you can go look for something else. So don't feel that, I guess the point is, don't feel that you need to find your dream job right out of the gate, because the chance of you doing that is pretty slim. Go find something that you'll enjoy, somewhere where you'll add value, somewhere where you can grow and improve, And that's just the first stop on many stops of the rest of your career.
Awesome. Great. Well, Alan, indeed, thanks a lot. I'm sure the audience is going to learn a lot from your insights, from your analogies, applying sports and business and vice versa, and the energy levels. I'm sure a lot of our audience is going to, gain. So thank you very, very much for spending the time and providing us your insights.
Absolutely my pleasure. I had a really good time. Thank you.
Yeah.